I am very excited today because I'm going to do a comparison between two beautiful fountain pens. The first one is the Parker 51 from around about 1955 to 1957, so that's a vintage. And the second is a modern Parker 51 released in 2021. And a huge shout out to Scott Newman of 15 Pens for helping me get hold of the beautiful vintage Parker 51. Well, this is totally thrilling, and I feel so lucky to have this pen on my desk. And in fact, this is the original case that the pen came in. You can see it's got Parker lettering there, and if you flip it on the back here, you might not be able to see that, but it does actually say Made in Canada. And if I turn that over here and open that up, beautiful. You see we got a pencil here and we got the Parker 51 here in the box, and this is indeed the vintage pen that we want to take a look at here. So let's just carefully put this to one side, and here is the case with the modern Parker 51 that we are going to compare against the vintage pen. And this pen itself, oops, let's take that out of there. Put that to one side. This pen was released in the beginning of 2021, and it's become very popular with fountain pen users. And this particular one actually is a stainless steel nib, but we also do have another one which has a gold nib here. Now the vintage pen has a 14 karat gold nib. This pen has an 18 karat gold nib, but I'm going to compare the modern stainless steel nib with vintage and see how the two of them compare. Now the first thing to note when you put the two pens together and they're capped is they're approximately the same length. However, when you uncap them, you'll notice that, let's take a look here, the modern pen is actually quite a lot smaller than the vintage pen. And I'm afraid I don't have a reason for you why Parker decided to redesign the length such. But, some people like a smaller pen. I personally prefer the longer vintage. So that's a win for the vintage for me. And I also realized when I flip the two pens over and I look at the feed mechanism here, the feed on the vintage pen is absolutely beautiful. It's sort of hidden away there, and you can just about see the nib poking out here. And the modern pen, you can see the feed and the nib together. It doesn't look quite as elegant as the vintage. Now, the hooded mechanism on the pens, you might wonder what that's for. And that was because Parker had extremely fast-drying ink. And so what they did was they created this hood mechanism so that the ink would actually hit the paper before it dried in the feed. Now, or on the nib and the feed. Now, on the modern pen, the nib's poking out a little bit there, but on the vintage, just the tip. So I think for me, the vintage, it certainly looks like a super elegant pen, at least at that end of the pen. The other thing I like about the vintage as well is it has a friction fit rather than a screw fit. So the modern one, you actually screw it into the cap. Whoops, that's the wrong cap. You actually screw it into the right cap there, and it screws in nicely. The vintage has this wonderful band which has a wonderful friction fit. It's not even a snap cap, actually, a modern snap cap. It's a nicer design, and I really like it. It just fits nicely into the cap, and you have a little bit of friction, bit of a click, and there you go. Now the barrel of this pen, the vintage pen, it's a lucite barrel. And I'm not sure, but I think this is just a regular lacquer or plastic barrel on the modern pen. And of course, the vintage pen has a 14 karat gold nib as well. Now you could get a Parker Special, which had a stainless steel nib, if I remember Scott's email. But this particular one has a gold nib. Now the other thing that's interesting about the vintage is the filling mechanism. Back in the day when Parker were making these pens, they had two types. They had a vacuumatic, which was like a plunger, and an aromatic, which is a squeeze filler, which this one is as well. So, you throw it into the bottle and squeeze the filler and the sac would fill up. The modern pen, of course, if I unscrew this one here, has a regular Parker converter, which actually I think with the non-gold nib you buy separately, takes cartridges as well, but it's a regular plunger converter there. So it's kind of, I don't know, kind of nice either way. Depends which one you prefer, but I got to say the vintage has certainly got a feel of class about it that maybe the modern Parker doesn't. Let's just pop the pens on the scale and see what the weight difference is between the two. So the modern Parker 51 is about 22 grams and the vintage is about 20 grams. So a couple of grams difference, not too much, not too significant. Let's give the pen a go. Let's give both of these pens a go. Now, I'm really curious because I think this pen's seen a lot of history. Scott told me it was around 1955 to 57, and without actually taking the nib apart and taking a look at the insides, he couldn't give me a definitive date. But this pen has seen a lot of history, and this pen is about a year old. So it'll be interesting to see the difference between the two. Okay, let's take a look at the vintage first. Oh, how wonderful is that? Oh, wow. It's a soft nib, and you can feel that it's a soft nib. Being a gold, 14 karat gold nib, certainly less stiff than a modern day steel nib for sure. That's sublime. That's sublime. And the flow is really, really good. Let's try the modern Parker 51 and see how it compares to the vintage. Oh, wow. Whoa, 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 whoa. Yeah, lovely. And I knew it would be because I actually use this pen every day pretty much. It's lovely. It's difficult to write and talk at the same time. It's a lovely pen. I think this nib is a little bit thicker than the vintage nib. The ink is certainly flowing a little more freely there, but the nib is certainly a lot stiffer than the vintage nib as well, which you would expect. It's a steel nib. It's a modern steel nib, definitely. I love this pen too. There is absolutely nothing wrong with the modern Parker 51, and there is absolutely nothing wrong if you prefer a vintage. They're both gorgeous pens. So the question is, which pen is better, the modern Parker 51 or the vintage Parker 51? And the answer is not that straightforward. If you love vintage pens, go for a vintage. If you love modern pens, go for a modern pen. It's really about which pen brings you happiness and which pen brings you joy. And whatever you choose, you're going to enjoy it for sure because they're both absolutely beautiful pens. Don't forget to subscribe by hitting the button below and find us at www.knightswriting.ca, and I will see you next time.